You're listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Keane. I'm the editor-in-chief of the internationally renowned journal Fire Ecology. I'd like to welcome you all here today. We have some very special people talking about a very special paper. The paper today we're going to be talking about is called Fire versus Herbivory for Oak Woodland Restoration. Burning achieves short-term structural and compositional objectives, whereas browsing alone fails to reduce stem density and promote ground flora. Incredibly interesting paper. I really suggest that you read it. And we have two of the main authors here today, Gina Beebe and Lauren Pyle. Gina and Lauren, could you introduce yourself with Gina going first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Beebe. I am a staff member at the University of Missouri. I did my master's in forestry here at the University of Missouri with the Forest Service, and then I transitioned into a position. I actually now work at the Center for Agroforestry, right across the hall from Forest Service at the University of Missouri.
Welcome aboard the Fire Ecology train, Gina. And how about you, Lauren?
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having us. So I'm Lauren Pyle Knapp. I'm a research ecologist with the Northern Research Station, so U.S. Forest Service, and I am also located in Columbia, Missouri.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming, you two. Lauren, could you tell us a little more about this paper? What's the elevator speech?
Sure, thanks, Bob. So woodlands in the Midwest are basically these open forests representing about 30 to 90% tree cover. They have this minimal mid-story, diverse and abundant ground flora. However, there's a lot of problems actually implementing and restoring these woodlands. Managers on the Mark Twain National Forest came to us with interest in doing something different in their woodlands because they were having a lot of challenges with just using fire, given some limitations on the site. So at the particular site where we did this research, we were limited by prescribed fire because we were close to an interstate, and they were also limited by fire because of the karst topography. And so they couldn't really use either in managing for wildlife habitat. So they were looking at trying to restore the structure and composition of an open woodland for multiple bat species due to a cave that's nearby the site. So there's a lot of aggressive woody stems, primarily a lot of oak sprouts, hickory sprouts, and other native species that were really impeding the ability of our native ground flora to really flourish in abundance and diversity. They had masticated the site a few times, but were not really getting the results that they wanted. Basically, they were promoting the woody sprouts instead of ground flora. Mastication is also really expensive. And so one of the managers on the Mark Twain was interested in using herbivory. He had a background in range and really wanted to see if we could use both browsing and prescribed fire to have an effect on the woody stem density and the ground flora. We also wanted to see if we could use goats in different parts of the season to have a greater effect on the woody stems than just using a dormant season application of treatment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Your whole methodology is incredibly interesting to me. Gina, can you tell us a little more? Give us the details on this methodology.
We chose goats in particular for a number of different reasons. And firstly, goats are really, really fun to work with. So that was definitely maybe not a motivating factor, but an interesting component of this research. But goats are able to stand on their hind legs and they're able to browse trees about, 6 feet up in the air. They can even climb up on snags, down snags and things like that. So during this research, I observed a goat that was browsing about 9 feet up in the air, so it can really target the mid-story for reduction, which is something that was a goal in this research project. And goats really are just like fire. So there's a lot of overlap between herbivory and fire, especially goats, because goats are so non-picky. They're not a picky eater. They have this reputation that they'll eat everything. And really from our experience, that was mostly true. They would eat pretty much any forb. They would strip the bark off cedar trees, which is a little unusual for goat behavior, but we witnessed that in our research. They'll eat oaks, they'll eat hickories. They love blackberries and rose and all this different stuff. So that was part of the reason that we chose goats. And just a little bit more about our methodology. We used a mob browsing or mob grazing, which is a way where you put a bunch of goats, a bunch of livestock in a small area at once. We had about 100 to 200 goats in about 2 to 7 acres at a single time. And then we left them there for only about a day to maybe a week. And they would just eat about 85% of the vegetation present. And then we would move the goats to the next treatment area. So that was our methodology in a nutshell.
That's incredibly interesting. I love the use of goats. Most people would think herbivory would be, cows or sheep, but that's great. Lauren, this next question goes to you. I know there was some special results in there. Why don't you give us a little preview of those results?
Yeah, we really found that there's a big difference between the effect of browsing versus fire. So fire had really an overriding effect on reducing mid-story stems, so basically top killing things, whereas goats kind of nibble on the outside edge of woody stems, kind of creating like little umbrellas in the mid-story. They did have an effect in comparison to the control, but really the effect by fire was so pronounced that it kind of reduced what we saw in terms of statistically meaningful results for the goats. We also saw that, fire burns leaf litter, which really kind of helped promote the ground flora. If we look at them independently for the restoration of woodlands over the 5-year period that we did it, we really see that fire is really important for reducing the mid-story stems quickly and also promoting ground flora. However, we did see from the browsing alone that through time we were having greater reductions in the mid-story stems. We weren't seeing really the effects on the ground flora, but it might just be somewhat of a lack of time. However, when we put those two things together, the browsing and the fire, we see differences in how the species are structuring themselves. So we actually had differences in species that did well versus didn't do well, basically because the browsing was having an overriding effect on species preferences by the goats. So goats preferring some species, whereas not preferring others. Things like black hickory was not a well-preferred species by goats.
Very nice. Incredibly interesting. So, all this research is done, the paper's out there. Gina, tell us how this research can be used by managers or what kind of recommendations you would propose.
Yeah, so like Lauren said, the fires seem to have a greater impact in the short term for our restoration goals. I think interestingly, over time, this could be more studied to see what the long-term impacts would be for our restoration goals. But from my perspective, where I sit currently, I work with a lot of land managers and agricultural producers, livestock owners, and that sort of thing. So I hear so many questions from folks who have what we might call, quote, marginal lands on their land. Something that's a degraded woodland, maybe full of honeysuckle, hasn't really been managed in the past 50 plus years, and people don't really know what to do with that space. They might not feel equipped for fire. It could be close to a road. They might not have the tools, but they have livestock. So what I have talked with people about often is how to integrate livestock into these spaces, not only from a restoration perspective, but also it's forage, it's feed for your animal. It's literally growing the body of an animal that you plan to sell. So I think that this study has a lot of potential for small to medium-sized landowners who are interested in integrating livestock into woodlands. We are also moving through some of these older viewpoints that people held about how livestock in the woods is always a bad thing and that we should keep livestock out of the woods and it's going to really degrade the woodland. And from our results of the study, that's simply not true. It might not be as effective as fire in restoration goals, but it certainly isn't degrading the woodland in the way that people think. So I think that this is a huge potential. Obviously, there's a lot more work I think that needs to be done with our livestock in the woods moving forward, but this seems really great. And a lot of people seem really, really interested in learning more.
Yeah, to me, this is multiple use management at its finest. Great study. Thank you, you two, for coming. I wonder, this appears as a paper as part of a special collection that you have put together, you and several other editors. I wonder if you'd like to talk about, if they're interested in this paper, maybe they'd be interested in the other papers in the collection.
Yeah, we've got a great collection from the 7th Fire and Eastern Oaks Conference that was held in Tyler, Texas in 2023. We've got a collection of 10 papers, including this one, everything covering fire and oak ecosystems across the eastern US. There's some really great things in there talking about using UAVs for doing prescribed fire, talking about fire severity in different ecosystems, and using goats as part of fire management tool.
It is a great special collection. Really appreciate your efforts in putting that together. Gina, would you like to recognize any co-authors or any funding agencies at this time?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to send some big thanks and gratitude to Dr. Lauren Knapp, who has joined us today. Thank you so much, Lauren. And then I also would like to give some recognition to Dr. Michael Stambaugh, Dr. Daniel Day, Brian Davidson, Dakota Maddox, and Dr. John Kabrick. I also want to give a big shout out to our goat contractor, Lawrence Steele. He provided us with, at one point, about 600 goats simultaneously in our study plots. So thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you to the U.S. Forest Service who helped fund this research, as well as specifically the Northern Research Station of the U.S. Forest Service. So really grateful for all of my co-authors, all of the help that I received, all the folks who helped me in the field collect this data. And of course, thanks to the goats too. They've been a key player in this.
Hey, you got to tell me, Gina, do those goats have a name?
I didn't name any of them. I didn't get that close with any of them specifically. If anybody is interested, they were sort of a mutt of boar goat with a bunch of other breeds, but they were meat goats specifically, if anyone was wondering.
Very good. Thank you very much, both of you, for spending your valuable time talking to me today and letting our readers and listeners know about this paper. If anybody wants to read the paper, guess what? It's available for free. Yes, free. All you have to do is go to our journal website, Fire Ecology, and download it for free. Read it as much as you want and pass it along to your friends. I want to thank Gina and Lauren for being here. Gina and Lauren, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Bob.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob. This was really fun.
Okay, why don't everybody just join us next time for a Fire Ecology Chat.
Thank you for listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our show and leave us a review. To learn more about fire ecology and support our future work by becoming a member, visit fireecology.org. fireecology.org.